I took in a starving, wounded alien fugitive who showed up at my door. Now she calls me her husband. Ethan had always lived a quiet life. He liked it that way. His house sat at the edge of the town, surrounded by tall trees that swayed in the wind and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Most days, he worked in his small engineering shop, fixing things for neighbors and making small inventions in his free time. He liked the calm, predictable rhythm of life: wake up, work, eat, sleep. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous, nothing unexpected. But that night everything changed. The sky was dark, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the smell of wet earth and the distant scent of smoke from someone's fireplace. Ethan had just finished fixing a broken fence post at the back of his property when he noticed something unusual. A small figure appeared at the edge of his driveway, staggering slightly. At first, he thought it was just a lost traveler, maybe someone who had wandered too far in the dark. But as he looked closer, he realized something about the figure was different. The figure was small, smaller than a normal person, but that wasn't the strange part. Its skin had a soft glow, like the light from a firefly, and its eyes, large, almond-shaped and dark, seemed to shine with an intelligence that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. The figure looked weak, exhausted, and clearly in pain. Something about it stirred a feeling in Ethan that he couldn't ignore. Even though his mind screamed at him to stay inside and call for help, his instincts told him to open the door. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare the figure. "Hello," he called softly. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The being didn't answer at first. It sank to the ground and groaned softly, holding one arm against its body. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew he couldn't just leave it there. The rain was starting to fall in gentle drops, and the night was cold. No living creature, human or not, should have to suffer alone in the dark. Ethan opened his door and stepped outside. The being looked up at him, and for a moment the world felt completely still. Its eyes met his, and he felt a strange connection, like they understood each other without words. He knelt down a few feet away, careful not to frighten it. "Come on," he said gently. "I'll help you. You can come inside." It hesitated, trembling slightly. Ethan could see its ribs moving under the glowing skin, evidence of long days without food. The hand it lifted to reach for him was small, delicate, almost human, yet there was something otherworldly about it. Slowly, cautiously, it took a step toward him. Ethan held out his hand, and after a long pause, it let him guide it toward the door. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and warm tea. Ethan led the being to a chair and wrapped a blanket around its small frame. The figure leaned into the warmth, shivering, and for the first time it made a sound, a soft, almost musical sigh. Ethan ran to the kitchen and brought a plate of bread and some water. He didn't know what this creature normally ate, but it needed something. The being looked at the food with wide eyes. It sniffed cautiously, then took a small bite. The way it ate reminded Ethan of a child, hungry, careful, and grateful. He watched silently, unsure what to say. He had never seen anything like this in his life. Not on television, not in movies, not in the stories people told about strange sightings. And yet here it was, sitting in his kitchen, injured, tired, and trusting him enough to eat from his hand. After a while, the being tried to speak. The words were broken, halting, but Ethan caught them. "Lyra, help, please." That was all it said at first. He realized it was trying to communicate in English, struggling with a language that wasn't its own. The name Lyra seemed important, so he remembered it. "My name is Ethan," he said softly. "You're safe here, you don't have to be afraid." Lyra looked at him, and for a moment her glowing eyes seemed to soften. She nodded slightly and curled up in the blanket. Ethan sat nearby, unsure what to do next. He had questions, so many questions, but he also knew that pressing too hard might scare her away. For now, he decided that the most important thing was to give her time, warmth, and food. Over the next few hours, Ethan noticed more details about her. Her fingers were slender and slightly longer than a human's, tipped with nails that glimmered faintly. Her skin, although glowing softly, had bruises and scratches, signs of injury. Every breath she took was careful, like she was conserving her energy. And yet there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a sense that she had survived much worse than the night she spent at Ethan's door. He couldn't help but think about how extraordinary this was. People saw things on the news, read stories online, and laughed at alien sightings, but he knew the truth now. Lyra was real, and she was in his house. A million questions raced through his mind. Where did she come from? Why was she here? Was she dangerous? And yet none of that mattered as much as the fact that she needed help, and he could give it. Ethan decided to make a small bed for her in the corner of his living room. He gathered soft blankets, folded pillows, and placed them in a quiet spot where she could rest safely. Lyra watched silently as he worked, occasionally glancing at him with those wide, glowing eyes. He wondered what she thought of him, a stranger who had suddenly appeared in her life, offering safety without question. He smiled faintly, realizing he didn't mind that she was different. In fact, there was something comforting about knowing that someone, somewhere, needed him just as much as he wanted to help. As the night grew deeper, the rain pattered against the roof, and the wind rustled the trees outside. Ethan sat in his armchair, keeping an eye on Lyra. She seemed to relax finally, closing her eyes and letting the blanket cover her entirely. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe. The world outside his door had disappeared. There was no work, no neighbors, no responsibilities, just him and this mysterious being who had appeared in his life, injured and trusting him completely. Ethan realized something important. This was the beginning of something he could not have imagined. A simple act of kindness, opening his door to a stranger in need, had changed his life in an instant. He didn't know how long Lyra would stay or what dangers might come for her, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't turn her away. Not now, not ever. He looked at her sleeping form, the soft glow of her skin illuminating the corner of the room. He felt a mix of awe, fear, and responsibility. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "You're safe here, Lyra. I'll take care of you." And for the first time in his quiet, predictable life, Ethan felt something he had never experienced before, a sense of purpose that went beyond his own world, beyond ordinary life, beyond anything he had imagined. Hours passed. The night was long and quiet, broken only by the occasional sigh or small movement from Lyra. Ethan sat there, thinking, wondering, imagining what her world must be like. He didn't know if anyone else would ever believe this story, and he didn't care. All that mattered was that she was here, and he had made the choice to help her. That choice, he realized, would change everything. As dawn approached, the first light of morning seeped through the windows. The glow from Lyra's skin had dimmed as she slept more peacefully. Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. He knew that the day ahead would bring questions, challenges, and perhaps danger. But it would also bring discovery, connection, and the beginning of a bond that neither of them could have predicted. That morning, as he made tea and bread for both of them, Ethan realized that his life had shifted irreversibly. A mysterious, wounded being had appeared at his door, and he had chosen to welcome her inside. That small act of courage, compassion, and trust had opened a door to a world he had never known, and for the first time, he felt the thrilling uncertainty of living a story far bigger than himself. And so, the quiet life Ethan had once known ended that night. In its place was a new beginning, one filled with wonder, responsibility, and the promise of the unimaginable. He didn't know what lay ahead, but as he looked at Lyra, still curled under the blanket, he knew one thing: he would face it all together with her. Ethan spent the morning carefully preparing a simple breakfast for both himself and Lyra. He had never cooked for anyone else in his life, except maybe a neighbor or a friend, but now he found himself humming quietly as he worked, thinking about the fragile being sleeping just a few feet away. Lyra stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open, revealing that soft, luminous glow that made her look both otherworldly and incredibly vulnerable. "Good morning," Ethan said gently, placing a small plate of bread and a cup of tea near her. Lyra blinked, her large eyes adjusting to the light. She reached out with her delicate fingers and took a small piece of bread. She tasted it slowly, as if testing its flavor. Ethan watched, fascinated. Everything about her was different: her mannerisms, the way she moved, the way she looked at the world. But there was also something deeply human about her reactions: curiosity, caution, and a quiet trust. Lyra's first words that morning were soft and hesitant. Thank you," she said, her accent unusual but understandable. She paused, as if struggling to find the right words. "Ethan, kind heart." Ethan smiled. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. These were the first words she had spoken directly to him, and they carried more meaning than anything he could imagine. He nodded and replied, "You're welcome, Lyra. You're safe here. I'll take care of you." After breakfast, Ethan tried to learn more about her. He asked simple questions, speaking slowly so she could understand. "Where are you from?" he began. Lyra hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor. She shook her head slightly. Far away, danger, follow me, she whispered. Ethan frowned. It was clear she had come from somewhere very dangerous, somewhere that humans couldn't imagine. He didn't press further. She would tell him when she was ready. Instead, he focused on helping her heal. Lyra's injuries were not just physical, they were also emotional. She flinched at sudden noises and seemed nervous around strangers. Ethan learned to move quietly in his home, keeping the environment calm and peaceful. He ran warm baths for her, tended to her scratches, and even tried to teach her small comforts of human life, like how to sit properly on a chair or how to drink tea without spilling. She observed carefully, trying to mimic his actions, and every small success brought a quiet smile to her lips. Days passed, and their routine grew. Ethan found himself talking to her about ordinary things, the weather, the town, and his work at the shop. At first, Lyra replied in broken words, but her English improved with each passing day. She told him about things he could not fully understand: distant stars, planets with strange colors, and creatures unlike anything on Earth. Her stories were incomplete, and sometimes she would stop mid-sentence, looking away as if afraid of revealing too much. Yet Ethan listened patiently, fascinated by every detail. One afternoon, while Ethan was repairing a piece of equipment in his shop, Lyra came in holding a small, glowing device. It hovered slightly above her hand, pulsating with a gentle light. "Help me understand," she said. Ethan approached slowly, examining the device. He had never seen technology like this before. The light seemed alive, almost as if it had a consciousness of its own. He realized that Lyra was trying to communicate in her own way, using tools and signals from her home. He nodded, reassuring her, "We'll figure it out together." Their bond began to grow in ways Ethan could not have predicted. Lyra would watch him as he worked, her eyes following every motion. Sometimes she would imitate him, picking up tools and pretending to fix something, her fingers glowing softly in the dim light of the workshop. Ethan laughed quietly at her attempts. They were clumsy but sincere, a reminder that even beings from distant worlds could share moments of joy and learning. As they spent more time together, Ethan began to notice small things about her personality. Lyra had a gentle curiosity that reminded him of children, but also a quiet courage that he admired. She was fearless in the face of unknown dangers, but cautious when it came to trusting new people. She was fascinated by ordinary objects, like books, lamps, or even a simple pencil. Watching her explore the world was like seeing life through a completely new lens. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Lyra spoke in a quiet voice. "Ethan, thanks, safe here." Her words were simple, but the meaning was deep. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I'm glad you're here. I want you to be safe." She looked at him, her eyes shining brighter than usual, and for a moment it was as if words were not necessary. Their connection went beyond language, but the peace did not last forever. Strange things began happening around the house. Lights flickered without reason, electronic devices malfunctioned, and Ethan sometimes felt a sudden chill in the air. At first he thought it was coincidence, but Lyra would tense up whenever these incidents occurred. One night she whispered urgently, "They look for me." "Danger close." Ethan's heart raced. He realized that the danger she had fled from was not just a story. Someone or something might be searching for her, and she had come to him for protection. From that night on, Ethan became more cautious. He double-locked doors, covered windows, and kept a watchful eye on anyone who came near the property. Lyra, sensing his anxiety, would sometimes rest her glowing hand on his arm, a silent gesture of reassurance. She didn't fully understand human behavior, but she knew he was trying to protect her, just as he had promised. This quiet understanding strengthened the bond between them, and Ethan found comfort in her presence despite the growing tension. During quiet evenings, Ethan would sometimes ask her about her home planet. She spoke slowly, describing worlds filled with colors he had never seen, skies with multiple suns, and landscapes that defied imagination. She talked about creatures that could shift their shape, rivers that glowed, and cities suspended in the air. Ethan listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the richness of her memories. He realized that her world was both beautiful and dangerous, and that she had survived hardships that no human could imagine. Lyra also began to learn more about Ethan's world. She was curious about everyday human life: cooking, sleeping, working, even the concept of money. Sometimes she would try to mimic human behaviors with awkward but endearing results. Ethan would laugh quietly at her attempts to use a fork or carry a basket, but he never mocked her. Instead, he guided her patiently, helping her understand without judgment. In return, she shared her knowledge of science and technology, showing him ways to look at the world differently. Their growing connection went beyond words and learning. Ethan noticed that he felt a deep sense of responsibility for her, a protective instinct he had never felt for anyone before. Lyra, in turn, seemed to sense his emotions, responding with gestures, expressions, and sometimes a gentle touch that conveyed more than words ever could. The more time they spent together, the more they relied on each other, creating a partnership built on trust, care, and an unspoken understanding. One night, as they sat together watching the stars through the window, Lyra suddenly whispered, "Ethan, my family gone." "You only family." Ethan was struck by the weight of her words. She had trusted him not only with her safety, but with her sense of belonging. He reached out, gently holding her hand. "You're not alone, Lyra, you have me. I'll be here for you." Her eyes glowed softly, brighter than ever before, as if she had found hope in his words. But danger was never far away. Strange shadows were sometimes seen near the edge of his property, and Ethan noticed unusual marks on trees and the ground. It was clear that someone, or something, was tracking her. He tried to remain calm, hiding his fear from Lyra, but the tension was undeniable. Every sound in the night made his heart race, and he became hyper-aware of their surroundings. He knew that protecting her would not be easy, but he was determined to do whatever it took. Through all of this, their bond continued to deepen. Lyra began calling him by a term from her language that roughly translated to husband or partner, though she did so hesitantly, unsure if Ethan would understand. At first, he was taken aback, unsure how to respond. But as he looked at her glowing eyes, full of trust and affection, he realized that this bond was real, meaningful, and mutual. He nodded quietly, accepting her words as a promise, and in that moment an unspoken commitment formed between them. Ethan also began to notice how much he had changed. He was no longer just a quiet engineer living a predictable life. He had become a protector, a companion, and someone willing to face dangers he had never imagined. The world outside his door had become unpredictable, thrilling, and sometimes frightening, but it had also become full of wonder and connection. Lyra had brought color, light, and purpose into his life in ways he could never have anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and their routine became a careful balance of safety, learning, and companionship. Ethan would go about his work while keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings, and Lyra would explore, learn, and sometimes share small stories from her past. Each day brought new discoveries, small victories, and moments of laughter that strengthened their bond. Even in the shadow of danger, they found moments of peace and joy. And so, life in Ethan's home became a quiet adventure, filled with wonder, tension, and growing affection. He had never imagined that opening his door on a rainy night would lead to this. An extraordinary being seeking refuge, a shared sense of family, and a connection that defied ordinary understanding. The bond between them continued to grow, rooted in trust, care, and the unspoken promise that they would face the unknown together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The nights grew colder as winter approached, and Ethan could feel the tension in the air. He had never thought of his quiet life as fragile, but since Lyra had appeared at his door, everything had changed. Even ordinary sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the rustling of leaves outside, felt threatening now. Ethan kept the lights dim, the doors locked, and his senses alert. Every time the wind rattled the windows, he instinctively glanced toward the shadows, wondering if danger was close. Lyra, despite her small size and delicate appearance, seemed surprisingly aware of these dangers. She moved with quiet precision, avoiding sudden noises and always watching the windows. At times, Ethan noticed her glowing eyes flicker toward the darkness outside, as if she could sense things he could not. "They come," she whispered one night, her voice barely audible. Ethan's heart tightened. He had hoped that whatever had chased her to Earth would never find her, but it seemed that hope was fading. The first real warning came on a night filled with heavy rain. Ethan was in the workshop, repairing a broken generator, while Lyra rested in the living room. He heard a sudden, sharp noise outside, a branch snapping, too deliberate to be caused by the wind. He froze. Lyra's head lifted, her eyes wide and glowing brighter than normal. "Not safe," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and peered through the window. At first, he saw nothing, only the wet darkness of his yard. Then a shadow moved near the edge of the trees, quick and deliberate. Panic tried to rise in Ethan's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He returned to Lyra and whispered, "We need to be ready. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." She nodded, her small hand brushing his arm as a gesture of trust. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it made his chest ache. This was no longer just a quiet life. This was survival, and he had a responsibility to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Ethan and Lyra took precautions. They reinforced the doors and windows, set up small alarms, and even covered some of the windows with dark cloth to prevent outsiders from seeing inside. Ethan taught Lyra how to move quietly, how to sense vibrations in the floor, and how to hide if necessary. She watched him carefully, absorbing every lesson with an intensity that reminded him of a soldier learning survival skills. And yet, for all the danger, they also shared small moments of calm, sitting together by the fire, sharing food, and quietly laughing at simple human customs she didn't fully understand. Ethan realized that the growing danger had brought them closer. Lyra's trust in him was absolute, and in return, he felt a bond that went deeper than friendship. One night, as they sat side by side on the couch, Lyra looked up at him and whispered, "Ethan, I choose you." Her glowing eyes were filled with emotion, something between hope and vulnerability. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected her to express such feelings so directly, yet in that moment, he understood the depth of their connection. The danger outside did not wait. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of red and orange, Ethan noticed movement near the tree line. Shadows darted quickly, and the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. He motioned for Lyra to hide behind the furniture while he grabbed a flashlight and quietly approached the window. There were figures, humans, but not ordinary humans. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, and their eyes seemed to scan the property with intent. Ethan's mind raced. Whoever they were looking for Lyra. Lyra's small hand found his shoulder, gripping it tightly. "They hear," she whispered. Her voice carried fear but also determination. Ethan nodded, swallowing his own fear. "We'll stay calm," he said softly. "We'll stay safe. No one gets in here." He realized that she had become his responsibility and that his life had merged with hers in ways he could never have imagined. Their fates were intertwined. That night they stayed awake in shifts. Ethan watched the house, flashlight in hand, while Lyra rested in a hidden corner. Every rustle outside made them tense, and every distant sound of footsteps made Ethan's heart pound. It was exhausting, but neither of them complained. They had developed an unspoken rhythm, a way of moving and communicating without words. When Ethan's eyes grew heavy, Lyra would lightly touch his arm, signaling him to rest while she took watch. Days turned into a week of careful vigilance. Ethan began to notice that Lyra was more than just fragile. She had incredible instincts. She could sense movement outside the house before Ethan could, and she often gave him warnings that allowed them to prepare. He admired her quiet strength, the courage that seemed to shine from her even in the darkest moments. Her presence gave him both responsibility and comfort, a strange but powerful combination. One afternoon, while Ethan worked on reinforcing the back fence, Lyra approached him with a small, glowing device in her hand. She gestured for him to follow her into the workshop. Once inside, she activated the device, and a holographic map appeared, showing points of light moving toward Earth. Ethan's jaw tightened. He realized that whatever had been chasing her across galaxies was now closing in. The map showed more than just distances. It suggested strategy, coordination, and intelligence. Whoever was coming was not random. They were organized and determined. Despite the fear that tightened his chest, Ethan refused to panic. He and Lyra spent the next few hours devising a plan. They discussed hiding spots, escape routes, and methods to confuse or delay their pursuers. Lyra, though small and delicate, was incredibly resourceful. She suggested using lights and shadows to mislead anyone tracking them. Ethan marveled at her ingenuity. He realized that her survival skills were extraordinary, honed by experiences he could barely imagine. Their partnership became a balance of trust and strategy. Ethan handled physical tasks, locking doors, setting up barriers, and preparing food. while Lyra used her knowledge and instincts to guide their safety measures. Together, they formed a team that was far stronger than either could be alone. Even in the face of danger, there were moments of laughter and playfulness. Her attempts to mimic human gestures, his awkward teaching of her simple skills, the quiet jokes they shared in whispered voices when the house was dark. One night after a particularly tense encounter with strangers lurking nearby, Ethan and Lyra sat together by the fire, exhausted but safe. Lyra leaned against him, her glowing hand resting lightly on his arm. "Ethan, not afraid?" she asked softly. He smiled, feeling the weight of his responsibility, but also the pride of keeping her safe. "Not with you," he replied. "We face this together, no matter what comes." Her eyes brightened with a mixture of relief and admiration. For the first time, Ethan felt that their bond was unbreakable, forged not just by trust but by shared danger. As the nights passed, Ethan noticed that their connection deepened in subtle ways. Lyra began calling him partner in her language more frequently, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes with certainty. Each time she did, Ethan felt a mix of surprise, warmth, and responsibility. He realized that this was no longer a temporary arrangement. They had become a team, a family of two. The thought both thrilled and scared him because it meant their lives were permanently intertwined. But danger was never far behind. One cold, foggy morning, Ethan noticed footprints near the edge of the property. They were unlike any animal tracks he had seen, too precise, too deliberate. He alerted Lyra immediately, and they both moved to a secure room in the house. She activated a small device that projected a faint light, revealing the shapes of figures approaching. Ethan's heart raced. The strangers were closer than ever, and their intentions were clear. They were hunting her, and nothing would stop them except the precautions Ethan and Lyra had taken. They spent the day preparing for the worst. Ethan reinforced windows, hid supplies, and created escape routes in case the strangers tried to enter the house. Lyra worked alongside him, using her devices and intuition to anticipate threats. Despite the fear, there was a strange sense of unity between them. They had become partners not just in survival but in life. Their laughter, quiet conversations, and small gestures of care were no longer ordinary. They were survival strategies intertwined with emotional connection. As night fell, the danger intensified. Ethan and Lyra huddled in a hidden corner, listening to the sounds outside. Footsteps approached, then paused, then retreated slightly. They could sense the tension building. Ethan's hand found Lyra's, holding it tightly. She returned the gesture, her glowing eyes meeting his in a silent exchange. Neither needed words. They knew that together they could face whatever came, no matter how terrifying. In the midst of this tension, Ethan realized something profound. Lyra had not only changed his life, but she had given it new meaning. Before she arrived, his days had been predictable, safe, and ordinary. Now, each day was filled with challenges, discoveries, and emotional depth he had never experienced. Protecting her, learning from her, and trusting her in return had transformed him. He no longer lived in a quiet world. He lived in a universe that was vast, dangerous, and beautiful, and he was no longer alone. And Lyra, for her part, seemed to draw strength from Ethan as well. She trusted him in ways she had never trusted anyone before. She shared her knowledge, her fears, and her memories with him, and in return, he offered safety, care, and a partnership that transcended ordinary understanding. Their bond had grown into something extraordinary, a partnership forged in trust, danger, and mutual respect. Even as the danger outside pressed closer, Ethan and Lyra found small moments of joy. They shared meals, taught each other skills, and laughed at simple human rituals that were foreign to Lyra. They explored their home together, turning ordinary spaces into places of safety, creativity, and warmth. In the darkness of the approaching threat, they created their own light, a reminder that even in fear, life could be beautiful. Ethan knew that the coming days would test them. The strangers outside were persistent, intelligent, and determined. But he also knew that he and Lyra were ready. They had learned to rely on each other, communicate without words, and face danger as a team. No matter what came, they would face it together. Their bond had grown stronger than fear, stronger than uncertainty, stronger than the unknown. And in the nights had grown tense in Ethan's home. Every shadow seemed to whisper danger, and every sound made both him and Lyra alert. Weeks had passed since strangers had first appeared near the property, and while they had avoided a direct confrontation, The threat was always looming. Ethan could feel it pressing closer, like a storm about to break, and he knew that something major was going to happen soon. Lyra seemed to feel it too. Her glowing eyes often scanned the darkness outside, and her movements had become sharper, more calculated. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange with the setting sun, Ethan noticed unusual patterns in the snow on the ground near the forest's edge. Footprints, precise and small, circled the property several times. It was clear that the strangers were testing their defenses, learning their patterns, and waiting for an opportunity. Ethan's heart pounded as he gestured for Lyra to come closer. "We need to be ready," he whispered. "Tonight, we cannot make a mistake." Lyra nodded, her face glowing faintly in the dim light. She moved swiftly to the workshop, gathering small devices and tools she had learned to use. Ethan watched her, amazed by her focus and courage. Despite her small frame, she moved with the confidence of someone who had survived unimaginable challenges. "I help," she said simply. The simplicity of her words hid the intensity of her determination. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude and protectiveness. Together, they were ready to face whatever came. As darkness fell, the air grew colder, and the forest around the house seemed to close in. Ethan and Lyra set up quiet alarms, improvised barriers, and communication signals. Lyra's glowing devices hovered in the corners, casting soft light that revealed shapes in the shadows. Ethan double-checked doors and windows, while Lyra monitored the outside, sensing every movement. They had practiced this before, but tonight felt different. The tension was higher, the danger closer, and the stakes far greater. Hours passed slowly. Every noise in the distance made Ethan's heart race. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the faint footsteps crunching over the snow. Each time, Lyra's eyes would flare softly, signaling that she had sensed the presence. Ethan followed her cues, moving quietly, checking the surroundings, and staying vigilant. Their teamwork had become seamless. They no longer needed words for every action. They understood each other instinctively. Suddenly, there was a loud, deliberate crash outside. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand, and they crouched low, hearts pounding. Shadows moved near the fence. This time, the strangers were closer, and their intent was clear. Ethan whispered urgently, "We need to move quickly. Follow me." He led Lyra to a hidden passage behind the workshop, a small tunnel he had created as a precaution after their earlier encounters. Lyra moved silently beside him, trusting his lead completely. The tunnel was narrow, winding beneath the house and emerging into a dense thicket behind the property. The snow muffled their movements, but the crunch of their footsteps still felt loud in the quiet night. Ethan glanced back at Lyra. Her eyes glowed softly, reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "We're safe for now," he said softly. Lyra nodded, squeezing his hand. That small gesture reminded him of the bond they had formed. The trust, the care, the silent understanding that they were in this together. Once they were in the thicket, Ethan paused to catch his breath and assess the situation. The strangers were now outside, patrolling the house in groups, checking every window and corner. They moved with precision, their coordination suggesting that they had been trained for this purpose. Ethan realized that this was not just a random threat, it was a hunt. And they were the prey. Lyra stepped forward, her small frame glowing faintly in the darkness. "I plan," she whispered. Ethan nodded, knowing that whatever she had in mind was likely beyond his understanding. She moved with purpose, setting small devices in strategic locations, lights, sensors, and gadgets he had never seen before. Ethan followed her instructions, learning quickly. Their plan was simple: distract, confuse, and if necessary, escape. Hours passed as they waited, hidden in the thicket. The strangers' patrols were relentless. Ethan could see their silhouettes moving near the house, sometimes stopping, sometimes scanning the dark. He could feel the cold biting through his clothes, but he ignored it, focusing on Lyra's guidance. Every instinct, every movement was crucial. One wrong step could expose them. Then it happened. One of the strangers approached the tunnel entrance. Ethan's heart raced. He motioned for Lyra to stay still. The stranger moved cautiously, scanning the ground, unaware of the small traps and devices they had set. Lyra's hand hovered over a small device, and with a soft press, a faint light flashed, creating a shadow that moved across the snow. The stranger reacted, stepping back, confused. Ethan felt a wave of relief. The plan was working. The distraction allowed them to move further into the forest. They had pre-planned several safe zones, places where they could hide temporarily and rest if needed. Lyra led the way, using her glowing devices to illuminate subtle paths that were otherwise invisible in the dark. Ethan followed, relying on her instincts as much as his own judgment. They were a team, perfectly in sync. As they reached one of the safe zones, Ethan realized how much he had come to rely on Lyra. Her courage, intelligence, and quick thinking had saved them multiple times. He also realized that he felt a deep, unshakable connection to her. She was no longer just someone he was protecting. She was a part of his life, a partner in every sense. He looked at her glowing eyes and felt a wave of emotion he had never experienced before. But there was no time to dwell on feelings. The strangers were still outside, and Ethan knew they could not remain hidden forever. Lyra began to speak, her voice low and determined. "We lure them away. They leave house." Ethan nodded, understanding her plan. It was risky, but it was their best chance to protect their home. They would need to act quickly, carefully, and decisively. They returned to the house under the cover of darkness, moving silently through the trees. Lyra activated her devices, creating lights and sounds that mimicked movement in other parts of the property. Ethan watched in awe as the strangers reacted, splitting into groups to investigate the illusions. It was working. The distractions were buying them precious time. Then the real challenge began. One of the strangers approached too close, directly toward the tunnel entrance. Ethan held his breath, waiting for Lyra's signal. She pressed a small device, and a soft hum filled the air, disorienting the stranger. The figure stumbled, confused, giving Ethan and Lyra the opportunity to slip past unnoticed. They moved quickly, hearts pounding, until they reached a secure spot near the back of the property. Once there, Ethan allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. He looked at Lyra, her small figure glowing softly in the dark. "We did it," he whispered. She smiled faintly, though her eyes reflected exhaustion and tension. "Together, always," she replied. That simple phrase carried more meaning than words could express. In the midst of fear and danger, their bond had strengthened, uniting them against any threat. The night continued, filled with cautious movements and careful observation. Ethan and Lyra had to stay alert, always watching, always listening. But even in the tension, there were small moments of connection, quiet gestures, shared looks, and whispered reassurances. Each moment reminded them that they were not alone, that they had each other to rely on, and that their partnership was more powerful than any danger outside. As dawn approached, the strangers retreated slightly, confused and unable to find their target. Ethan and Lyra remained hidden, exhausted but safe. They knew this was only a temporary victory. The threat was far from gone. But they also knew something else. Together, they could face anything. Their bond, trust, and shared determination had given them strength beyond what either could have imagined alone. Ethan looked at Lyra, her glowing form resting against a tree. He realized that their journey was far from over, but he felt a sense of hope he had never known. They had survived the night, outsmarted their pursuers, and most importantly, had each other. That realization filled him with a quiet, unwavering determination. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would protect her, and she in turn would face them with him, side by side. The sun rose, painting the forest with soft light. Ethan and Lyra moved carefully back toward the house, aware that the day would bring new challenges. But as they walked together, hands brushing, hearts aligned, they felt an unspoken promise between them. They were a team, a family, and nothing could break the connection they had forged. For the first time, Ethan understood that their lives were no longer ordinary. Every day, every moment was filled with purpose, danger, discovery, and the extraordinary bond they shared. Lyra had brought him into a world he had never known, full of challenges, beauty, and connection. And in that world, he had found something priceless: trust, partnership, and love. Even as the threats lingered, the unknown stretched before them, and the challenges remained daunting, Ethan felt ready. Because he was no longer alone, and Lyra, the extraordinary being who had appeared at his door months ago, was not alone either. Together, they would face the world, the dangers, and the unknown, hand in hand, hearts connected, and spirits united.